Hello, everyone. I'm Daven Lee, and I am with Yael Bernhard, who is together, we've co-created the Power of the Yin Oracle Deck. So I conceived this idea, I wrote the text, and Yael beautifully agreed to partner with me in creating the stunning and powerful images that are the heart of the deck. And I'm really excited that we're going to have a conversation. I'm noticing it's windy. I have no idea if there's a storm blowing in. I'm sitting outside. But what I'm excited about is Yael's actually going to share her experience in creating these cards and her artistic and creative process, as well as some of the stories. So you'll finally get to hear directly from her and not just from me about this deck. So thank you, Yael, for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Daven. I want to start by saying that I loved working on this deck. It was such a unique opportunity and such a big opportunity. So many images, so many concepts that I love. My work as a visual artist is rooted in Jungian psychology and all the many, many archetypes of universal human experience. And the opportunity to illustrate so many of those archetypes was such a pleasure and such a challenge. It had to be done in a way that suited your words, Daven, and brings them to light. And honestly, at the beginning of the project, I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. I looked at this mountain of work in front of me and thought, how am I going to climb that mountain? I didn't really have a map, but fortunately, what I do have is experience, and I've never been unable to climb one of these mountains before. And though this one was different and maybe bigger, I had faith that I would make it because I've done lots of literal mountain climbing in my life, and here in the Catskills where I live. And as in life, so in art. That's been my credo. And as in art, so in life. So I work as both as a visual artist and as a writer. So I'm used to putting into words my creative process. I write a newsletter called Image of the Week that I've been doing for about 8 years now. And I enjoy it very much. And it seems like people who are interested in the creative process enjoy it very much. I'm not used to speaking spontaneously, but the images themselves, I think, will lead me into what I want to say. So as a visual artist, I work in a number of different modes. I'm an illustrator, and within that category, there are different specialties. I've done a lot of religious illustration. I've done children's book illustration. I've published over 40 children's books that I've illustrated. I've written about 10 of them. I've also done lots of logo illustration, many images for midwives and doulas and people who are close to children and babies and mothers in their lives. I'm the mother of 3 children myself, all of whom were born at home with the support of incredibly skillful midwives. I'm extremely grateful for those experiences, and they inspired hundreds of paintings, many, many paintings about the mothering experience. And I know, Daven, that's where you first saw my work, was when you were working for Mothering Magazine, and my work was there. So that was a wonderful beginning. I've also done a lot of fine art in my life, and that too is divided into several categories. I do landscape painting, I do still lifes, I do a lot of conceptual and energetic painting, and I'm going to explain that shortly. The only thing I have not done is portrait painting. I mean, I've done some, but I've never really gone down that road and developed myself as a portrait painter. It's because duplicating reality is just not my interest. I feel like cameras do a better job at that than I do. So my job is, my calling is not to duplicate reality, but even if I'm painting something realistic, to simplify and enhance it, bring something out of it that's more than reality. And this is grounded in my background in post-impressionist art, where artists were still anchored in reality in many of the works they created, but they were trying to simplify, enhance, and transform their subject matter. Eventually, that went even further and went into abstract and purely visual art, which doesn't really interest me. I like there to be content in my work and meaning. Okay. Daven, do you have any questions for me before I go on?
No, I love it. I'm thrilled with what you're sharing.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, as a fine artist, I've worked in both of those modes in an overlapping and shifting kind of way on the power of the yin. I've pulled out about 20 of the original paintings that show examples of these different approaches. So the first approach that I think is easy to understand is the storytelling approach. And this is me operating as an illustrator, as I would as a children's book illustrator, but the subject is more for adults. So here's an example. Here's the painting for Eternity. This is acrylic on canvas. They're all acrylic on canvas. And as you can see, they're many times larger than the cards because the reduction process has a positive enhancing effect of its own. And I apologize if some light from the window might be backlighting this painting.
It looks very clear. And I just want to say how exciting it is that you're sharing the paintings themselves, because even on the screen, there is a different feeling about them. It's exciting to see them. So thank you.
Yeah. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do here, but the concept of eternity is a little bit frightening. It conjures up a feeling of death, of what is beyond life. And so I wanted to make the figure into a kernel of a figure, a sort of fetus, a fetal position, as we are alone and facing the afterlife as we approach eternity. And then the waves, the concentric waves around the figure suggest an enlargement beyond form, an expansion and an enlargement beyond form, which is something I felt happening to me periodically as a child. Used to lay in bed and feel that I was expanding beyond the boundaries of my body. It was a very strange feeling. Wow. So I allow these associations to infuse my work as much as possible. And then the moth came to me. As often happens, something comes to me right when I'm thinking about a painting. Sometime in the next day or week or two, another piece will come to me, and if I watch for it, there it is. I had climbed a year ago West Kill Mountain here in the Catskills. It's almost 4,000 feet high. It's a pretty challenging hike. And on the top of the mountain, my friends and I came across this beautiful moth, this size. This is the actual size of the moth. And it was just sitting on the forest floor, and it was moving its wings up and down slowly. I was so intrigued. I took a video of it. I thought about it, and I realized, you know, moths are creatures of the night. They're drawn to the light. So many stories of people being drawn to the light after they leave their bodies.
Yes.
And it just felt right that this woman, that these wavy patterns expanding beyond her body could remanifest in the wings of the moth. So I put similar patterns in the wings of the moth. And of course, the darkness opens to the light. So the darkness kind of forms an enveloping enclosure, but it opens to the light. So that's the story behind that storytelling image.
I'm also seeing the containment moving into the uncontained.
Yes.
Finite container moving into what goes beyond the boundaries of the painting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for adding that. Okay. This painting, Divine Masculine,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a revisiting of a painting on the subject that I did on my own for myself many years ago when I was falling in love, perhaps for the first time, and really getting into the union of opposites in my art. And this is the joining of earth and sky. So the masculine comes down from the sky, the feminine comes up from the earth. The feminine is in the feminine colors of the blue, cool colors. The masculine is tending more toward earthy, fiery colors, although you could interpret it in the opposite way if you wanted, because the woman has the more celestial colors and the man has the more earthy colors. So I think about this kind of thing and wrestle in my mind with it. Which way should it go? And I finally decided to put it this way, that they each have a kernel of the opposite within, just like a yin yang.
Yes.
And here they are joining together in a single stream. And they're moving through the fabric of the material world. In the previous incarnation of this image, which was called the Night Sea Journey, it was tilted this way and it had a different fabric. But the Night Sea Journey is about the transcendence of the material in the divine, in dreams, in love, in whatever is numinescent in life. So this painting is standing on the shoulders of the previous one, which actually was a linoleum block print that I did many years ago. I like revisiting the same themes, and it came out of the same idea. And this was very satisfying to do another version of it and to build upon it.
Yes, I want to mention that there are several images, there are several illustrations of the deck that were based on previous images you had done, and people can see those on your website. I know you're going to be redesigning that website, but in your portfolio is incredibly inspiring for this deck.
Here is the priestess of the yin. And David, I love the way each image makes your face just light up.
It's true.
You really are a pleasure to work with.
I feel so intimate, and yet in a very different way from you, of course, with each image. So it's true. It's like, oh, this one. Oh, this one.
They get to be like old friends. The images, the cards, and the cards and the text combined kind of took on an entity of itself for each one. Okay, so this is a storytelling image, and a technique that I've used a lot in my work is architecture. So I've done a lot of multicultural illustration in which the way to convey a sense of place is through architecture. But I didn't always want to just, draw or paint actual buildings and things like that. I wanted to capture the essence of architecture and use it as the architecture of the image. So I often begin a painting by creating a tiny little postage stamp sketch in the margin of whatever manuscript I'm working with. So I printed out your text, and with pencil, literally the size of a large postage stamp, in which all I can do is break up the space with a few lines into its most basic geometric architecture.
Wow, that is
so that's how this image began, basically with, I want an archway, and I want the archway to be under kind of these ancient steps. This is kind of like one of those Mesopotamian tiered constructions that were done in the Fertile Crescent. you know,
Mhm.
5,000 years ago.
It also reminds me, of course, of the Mayan
Yes,
pyramids. I mean,
pyramids,
it's
yes,
just a universal kind of ancient
right,
textual
right.
language.
Right. And so the priestess is the earth. Again, this is the union of earth and sky. And so I tried to make the sky into a cloud being.
Mm.
Um, and I love the two upside down profiles coming together. In both cases, the profiles are upside down in relation to each other,
Mm, mm.
and they come together. That's such an intimate kind of kiss. You don't kiss someone like that unless you really adore them. I used to bend over and kiss my kids like that. But anyway, there's quite a bit of copper metallic paint here, which I don't know if you can see it.
Oh,
It's reflective.
oh, look at that. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that does not come through on the printed cards.
Yeah.
But I felt compelled to do it anyway. And if the original ever sells, that'll be a bonus for the buyer. So Daven, I want to mention that this is one of the paintings where you asked for a revision,
Yes.
because originally this archway here looked, there was a central arch here that looked rather phallic.
Yeah.
And you didn't like that. And I thought you would like it, because this, after all, is an image of the union of masculine and feminine, but it didn't sit well with you, which was fine. And we decided to replace it with a branching tree. And I like that. I like the solution. I like that there's a little less hard edge geometry within her, and more flowing kind of curvy lines. It seems
Yeah.
like a nice balance for the really strong geometry of this painting.
Mhm.
And, you know, most of the time when you suggested a revision, I thought it was an improvement. So I didn't mind at all.
Yes.
Okay.
With your experience as an illustrator, I really could feel there wasn't the same kind of, you're very open to the feedback, the adjusting, you said multiple times, I think, this needs to suit what you want, not necessarily my vision, your vision. And at the same time, there were times when you really advocated for certain things. And that was really instructive for me. It's like, I wanted that, so it's like we're both
Yeah.
strong in co-creating and
Right.
collaborate, in the collaboration. And there were
Right.
times where I was like, you know what? I I don't need to be attached to my idea of it, or I'm just going to trust what you've created. And of
Right.
course, with a project like this where I want this to be something that is so personal to every person who has it, and they're going to have their own personal relationship with each card and what it means to them and reflects back to them.
Mhm.
It's not just about me and what it means to me.
Exactly.
So there's even that creates this spaciousness that that felt really good to actually surrender to
Right.
some control to.
Yes, and when I did ask you to reconsider, it was for that reason, because I thought it would be best for how the image will be perceived by others, not just you. I have a lot of experience from feedback from my own viewers on how images are perceived by people, and it never fails to amaze me how people see things so differently than I expect, so differently from each other. It's really quite remarkable. But I do have some sense. And just to give a simple example, if you paint somebody with green skin, unless the context in which they're painted makes everything look green, they're going to look sick to most people.
That's what
Green
that
skin is associated with unhealthiness, and you can't change that in the viewer. You can't make a green-skinned person, especially if they're among other people, and not expect people to see that as sick. Just as if you paint somebody with blue lips, it's probably going to make them look cold. So
Yeah.
there are universal associations, and those are just simple examples.
Well, and those are interesting examples because we also really had our eye on this being a I don't even want to say multicultural, just a deck that is not attached to any one kind of image of a human being, that there are all these variations and
Right.
really moving, just creating an incredible width of representation. And
Right.
colored skin that was not normal color for human skin was a big part of
Right.
that is a big part of this.
Yeah, I don't like to restrict myself to realistic skin tones. Okay,
Boring.
so here's the painting of birth. This is another storytelling image. And it's based on, my own experience, which is that I come from a generation of women that had better options open to them sometimes, not all women. I was fortunate that the resources that I needed and the support that I needed to have a home birth showed up for me at the right time. And so women today aren't like strapped down flat on their back when they're giving birth, and maybe in any number of positions, including this one. And so this expresses, this woman has strong thighs to be holding herself up during the incredible power of a contraction. And she's totally in her power. She's also in the grip of her power, which is completely overwhelming in childbirth. It goes beyond the womb and the belly to completely swallow you up. I remember feeling like my own self was disappearing in the grip of these overpowering contractions. And so
There's
body
surrenders. She has to surrender to her own power.
She has to surrender, and she might not be finding that so easy.
Yes, yes.
I certainly didn't find it easy, because it doesn't necessarily feel like your own power. It feels like the power of your uterus. But the sensations can spread out beyond that boundary to kind of engulf your whole body. So I'm trying to express this here with all these concentric gradients. And body position expresses a great deal in illustration. It's almost like another form of architecture. It determines it's the bones of the image, the position of the bones of the image determine how it will come across and what it communicates to the viewer. And I want to emphasize that the main difference between fine art and illustration is that illustration is intended from its inception to be a form of visual communication, whereas fine art may or may not be that. It can be purely for self-expression or to create a beautiful surface. It's not necessarily a vehicle of communication, although it frequently can be used as one. That's not necessarily the motivating spark. So here is Guidance, another storytelling image in which, Daven, you had requested wild animals, the bear as a guiding ally.
Yes,
Voices among the trees.
Beings, all kinds of beings.
All kinds of beings, seen and unseen, that this woman is hearing and listening for as she is foraging for mushrooms, as David and I both have this incredible passion for mushrooms, and traded photos of mushrooms throughout the process. Mushrooms can be seen in the most uncanny places.
And I want to add about the specific requests in this image that a bear showed up for me the last year that I was in Santa Fe before I started traveling abroad. An actual bear was visiting my home, and like right outside my bedroom window for like at least a month, or as long as the peaches were in the peach tree. And previous to that bear, I had a beautiful client that I worked with for over a year. And I know she won't mind that I mention her, not by name, but one of her beautiful guides was a bear. And so I got to know her guides. And so that to me was also, there are a lot of nods to my clients in this deck. And so this is one of them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So.
Very interesting. Yeah. And so she's holding a reishi in her hand.
Mhm.
It's kind of over her heart. Just
Oh,
very dark red.
yeah, it's showing up beautifully.
Yeah. And this is a nod to reishi, which I love, is an incredibly beneficial medicinal mushroom that is beneficial for the heart and the cardiovascular system. So that's why she's holding it there. I also work part-time for Catskill Fungi, which is a medicinal mushroom company, and I make reishi mushroom extract.
Mm. And I love what you just said about the heart. So I didn't know that about, you know, way more about mushrooms than I do. I'm just sort of a dabbler, but that idea of walking through the forest and seeking guidance and having the heart be sort of held and honored in
Yes.
connection with our guides is really a beautiful meaning, additional meaning to bring to that now that I know that.
Yes, and I could add that the white or light roots under the tree, that's not roots, that's mycelium.
Yes.
The interconnecting underground lacy portion of a mushroom that connects tree roots to each other and helps the whole entire forest to survive.
Mm.
This is your sexual soul. And this is also based on a previous painting. If you recall, David, you saw that painting and you asked me if we could use it as is, but it wasn't exactly right. And that painting was an image of the special rest of the Sabbath, known in Hebrew as menucha.
Ah.
The Sabbath is a time of rest and of receptivity at the end of the busy 6-day work week that in mythological terms, that God created the world in 6 days in the book of Genesis and then rested on the Sabbath. And I've always loved all archetypal origin myths, and this one is certainly no exception, especially since my own heritage is rooted in the Jewish tradition.
And the Sabbath, I never thought of this. That's the yin time.
That's the yin time, yes, of pausing and receptivity and renewal and replenishment for the soul. And so this is why it's divided into night and day, because the Sabbath begins it begins in the evening and it ends in the evening, as all Jewish holidays go from sundown to sundown. And it ends when the first 3 stars are visible in the sky. So there are 3 stars here visible in the sky, and there's the day of the Sabbath in between. And the woman is obviously in a state of rest and self-composure. And I just made it a little more sensual and suggestive of the erotic for this, for the text of the image, your sexual soul. And that seemed to work. And Daven, you felt strongly that you wanted this image, although it's a sexual image, you wanted it to not show a partner. And this was a recurring theme for you, that all the images of love and sensuality were of a single figure, except for the divine masculine, where we really had to show a masculine figure and priestess of the yin. All the other ones are all about completion within the self and love and connection as an intrinsic quality that a person manifests within themselves. Maybe you want to say something about that?
Yes. And there are a few other cards. There's Devotion, which is a circle of 3 women. Behold,
Right.
Mother Earth. There's also your attention, which has your attention and presence, which are mother baby images, have mothers and babies.
Right.
But
But many,
yes,
many images of completion within the self.
yes.
One
Yeah,
person.
this is one of the, I mean, this is the foundation of my work. Is so if somebody comes to me to work with their sexual soul, to remember, reawaken, re-enliven their sexual soul,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's coming from a place of challenges in a relationship, it begins
Mm-hmm.
with the self. It begins with our own intimacy with ourselves, our own deep relationship with ourselves. And from there, we connect with others. And of course, from connecting with others, then we have a deeper knowledge of ourselves. So it isn't an either or. But yeah,
Love
when I
that.
think of the power of the yin, for me, this deck is really about sourcing something that is about our own soul's journey. And
Mm-hmm.
and our soul does not exist in a vacuum. I mean, guides and guidance actually is a great example. That's not about being alone. That's about actually being surrounded by guides and guidance, or being with trees, or being in nature, or being with the mushrooms. These are all um, intelligence
Mm-hmm.
that's around us, and sentience. But yes, I am interested in beginning with the very deep, intimate, personal journey of the self in relation to all those other things. So
I love that.
kind of shines an interesting personal light on me. I'm an only child. I am single at the moment and have often been single, and I have a very rich and ongoing developing inner life that's very personal and private for me. So that very much reflects my journey.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I
Yeah,
love it.
thank you.
So just three more storytelling images, and I'm not
Yes.
going to share the stories behind these, but the idea is that with a storytelling image, you can kind of make up a story of your own, because
Yes.
the components of the image are suggestive.
So that I want you to talk about this image and what you shared with me about this image when you created it. Would you be willing to do that?
Uh, I don't remember what I shared with you when I created it.
Well, a few things. I'll prompt you.
Okay.
First of all, you are a bow hunter. So
Right.
this, which
Was a bow hunter. I
you have
hunted.
been,
Yes.
I think once you are, you always are. So to me, it's present tense.
Okay.
Um, and so there, you have an embodied understanding of this really Artemis archetype figure. And then you
Yes.
also talked to me about the visual effects that you created, that there isn't
Oh,
actually the line of the bowstring.
right. Okay. Thanks for reminding me. Yes, I was an active hunter with compound bow and with rifled shotgun for almost 20 years. I'm very passionate about nutrition, and I wanted wild meat. I didn't want to eat factory farmed meat. And I live in a forest preserve area, and wanted to take my meat directly from the land. I've also studied medicinal herbology all my life and have foraged and made my own medicines all my life. So I'm very interested in wild food. And this is how I provided meat for my children when they were growing up.
Hmm.
I was again fortunate that the resources and support that I needed to do this showed up in the form of a very supportive hunting mentor who was my hunting partner for many years. And when he passed away 12 years ago, and my eyesight began to diminish, and my hearing, I have hearing loss in one ear, and back problems. So I don't hunt anymore, but if I'm gifted with a deer, I still butcher my own deer. I've always done that. So I'm very intimate with deer, and I'm very intimate with life and death. I took it on also, again, as in life, so in art. I felt that if I immersed myself in a life and death experience, that it would enrich my art.
Mm,
And having given birth 3 times, I wanted to experience more of the flip side of that duality.
mm,
And opportunities to hunt came to me as my children were getting to the age where I could leave them a little bit more. So it worked out, and it really felt like my destiny. And so I've done a lot of art about hunting, which is on my website, and a certain amount of writing as well, which is not on my website. But in my Image of the Week newsletter, occasionally I write about one of my hunting images. So,
which are very shamanic images to me.
yes. Well, yeah, I went through a phase of delving into shamanic culture and mythology and art as well. So
Mhm.
there's that element there. And that leads into what I call energetic art. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, so this is an image of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt in Greek mythology. And I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It builds on another painting of Artemis that I did years earlier, actually 2 versions of the same painting. And in those paintings, she's pregnant while she's hunting.
Oh,
And I did have the singular experience of being pregnant with my 3rd child as a hunter, and that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I was in my 1st trimester with her when hunting season came around, so that was pretty amazing.
wow.
And I did actually shoot a bear and ate the entire bear during my pregnancy. So my daughter has the middle name Ursa, and she is
Mm.
quite a strong-willed young lady,
Mhm.
now 21 years old.
Mm,
Okay. So in terms of the technique, Daven's text inspired the background, which is completely new.
mm,
It has to do, true yang has to do with intention, with precision and clarity of intention. And this is an unstoppable, fiery, angular force that
mm,
is converging somewhere over here
mhm,
in whatever its goal is.
mm.
And the actual bowstring is not articulated. It's merely a break in the background. And that's kind of what a real bowstring is like. You can hardly see it if you watch someone doing archery, unless they have their these little tufts of fringes called, or what sometimes looks like a pom-pom, called a silencer, that helps to to quell the vibration of the bowstring.
Wow.
That's on there, then you can see the bowstring a little better, but without that, it's pretty hard to see.
Wow.
So I thought that was cool to show it like that.
Yes, and I'll just add that after some feedback during the creation process, one piece of feedback when I posted this image, somebody said she's pointing to the
Oh, right. You
to the
flipped
west
it.
side, which looks like the past as opposed to the east. So in the deck, it's flipped the other way.
Right, right. Well, if you're a student of a language that goes from right to left, as I do, then you might not know
Ah,
that way.
good point.
So,
Maybe the
okay.
next edition will flip it back the other way.
Right. And here's the last storytelling image. And David, this is your story. You want to share your story? You
In the
kind of
design of it.
told me
Yeah,
what
can
you
you
wanted me
hold it
to
up a little
show.
bit? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
Well, okay, so this is stillness. And there's so many images, there's so many images and concepts in the deck that denote sitting, or these subtle things like intuition, or the listening is another card. I mean, how do you distinguish an illustration of listening from an illustration of stillness, or an illustration from subtlety? But to me, I had a real sense of a winter landscape, which is very yin. Winter is the yin time.
right.
And I'm not, I think, how did the rabbit, I don't know, at some point the image of the rabbit came to me. You see rabbits even in winter. And
Yes.
of course, they move either from, statue stillness when they are listening and very, very attentive, to, of course, moving very quickly. And I love, yeah, I can't remember how the conversation went about place. I think you placed that rabbit, or I think I said I want a rabbit in there, and there she is in the belly, which has become a real internal image for me. And the other piece I wanted is a sense of this woman being part of the landscape, dissolving into the landscape imbuing her, a kind of translucency in the landscape. And I grabbed some images. I would often have an image in mind and look for something on the internet that was sort of like it, sometimes as a way for us to communicate with each other. And this is unlike any of those. And of course, I love it. So it got us to where we wanted. That's what I recall. Are there other things you recall about it?
No, I think this is also the only winter landscape we have in the whole deck.
I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah. So it was a welcome change. I wanted to provide diversity in every sense. And I'll talk more about that later as well. So, okay, so I want to shift into focusing on another category, a different approach that I took for some of the images, which is what I call an energetic approach. So I studied for many years African art and primitive art from all over the world. And I've also studied African dance and African drumming all my life. And I teach West African drum classes. And what I learned from African art is that it's all energetic. It's all about capturing energy in visual form. There are many ritual objects that become fetishes that have organic material like mud or red ochre clay, things like that, and other substances added to them, poured onto them with in ritual applications, nails driven into them, things applied to them so that they accrue layers. Clearly, depicting reality is really not the goal of tribal art. It's more about interpreting reality and depicting an inner reality. And this is also what shamanism is about. And to some degree, this was picked up by the post-impressionists because they were among the first artists to collect African art and tribal art. And I don't know if they assimilated this concept consciously or not, or whether it just kind of trickled down into their work. There was an entire exhibition on this subject at the Museum of Modern Art many years ago called Primitivism in 20th Century Art. And they make a distinction between an affinity and an influence. So the influence would be more direct, such as the influence of African masks on how Pablo Picasso depicted faces. That's an influence. An affinity is when there's an uncanny reflection or resemblance to something and nobody knows exactly how it showed up, but it's just there. So I immersed myself in this idea in my 20s, in my early years as an artist, and I still have the exhibition catalogs from that show on my shelf. And I traveled to Africa 3 times to study the traditional dance and drum at its source, and really immersed myself in that culture. And so it comes out in the body of work that I do, both as an illustrator and as a fine artist, in trying to capture energy in visual form. And how is that done? It's done through texture and shape and color, as with anything else, but it's just a different approach. So I think I can more quickly go through some examples. These paintings are more resemble what I would call fine art, but they still were conceived as illustrations to communicate a concept. This is self-knowledge. And the idea here is that the outline of the figure, the white outline, is like a thread that's threading its way through a tapestry and winds up creating itself.
Mm. Mm.
And so it's this white thread is going through a landscape of experience. The tapestry represents as if somebody were making a story quilt of their own life, but there's no content filled in here because I want it to be universal. So it's just colors and interlocking shapes, as if this is the person's life experience. And as he or she makes their way through, they wind up creating themselves.
Mm.
And there's a spark in the middle at the heart.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is personally one of my personal favorites, because it's in this style, and I love the two different palettes that I employed here. This is very challenging for me personally to employ two different palettes within a painting. Marc Chagall does this all the time, and I have envied his ability to do that all my life. Like, how does he do that? And
You've
I
done it.
managed to do that here.
Yes.
So that's self-knowledge.
That's one of them that also makes me think of those. I don't know what the group of painters would be called, but I saw that Helma F.
Cubists.
Clint.
Cubists.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking of Helma F. Clint and these strange organic shapes that are they're not symmetrical. They don't follow they don't look to me like they follow a mathematical principle. They're very organic. And yes, cubist and the interesting colors and shapes and that abstraction.
Right. And so the post-impressionists, I think I'm using that term as a very broad category. There are a lot of sub-movements within that category, and I think that encompasses her work. At a time when reality was being exploded, not only by new technology, but as well the theory of special relativity that Einstein released into the world, I think about 100 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, really had a huge impact on philosophy and art and literature, because the idea that time and energy are that E equals MC square, it really got people thinking in new directions and breaking out of patterns of reality. So the asymmetry itself and the seeming randomness of her work and of abstract expressionists and post-impressionists is an expression of this, that we can explode reality, we can rebel against reality, we can rebel against industrialization, we can rebel against fascism and war. So art was very much a rebellion against the establishment and the status quo in many ways, busting apart the conventions of the Victorian era and of the accompanying salon art that was as tightly controlled as a woman wearing a corset.
Yes.
So,
and also the
spiritualists. Sorry?
I was going to say also the spiritualists that were, and then you've got Carl Jung coming in again, who did understand the connection with the primitive art, the primary art of other cultures.
Yes.
Fascinating. And by the way, for people who are listening to this, what feels like a very intimate, private conversation, these are the kinds of conversations and sharing that we've had throughout this whole process that's made it so rich and beautiful. And so it's fun to have them again. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So in this case, my goal was to capture a mood, and to convey, if possible, some energetic sense of the dissolving of forms into the whole, into the night sky. And it's like the unwinding of a double spiral as it unwinds, like the galaxy, like the Milky, you're becoming the Milky Way. So formation and dissolution. And I should add here that the final stage of making a triple extraction of mushrooms involves the stirring of 3 different liquid extracts together. And when we stir it, it's our practice at Catskill Fungi to consciously infuse the liquid with positive intentions. And we think about all the components of the forest inculcating in the mushroom, and then we stir the other way and imagine it going out into the world to benefit people. And so this stirring, the extract forms sort of a frothy vortex that looks much like this while we're stirring it. And so that had something to do with this image as well. Here's another figure of sort of a tapestry of interlocking shapes, interlocking colors. I love doing that. I love artists who do that, like Paul Klee has done a lot of interlocking textured shapes that are not quite controlled. They look kind of organic, like they're moving. They have a child-like quality to them. So here I'm emulating that kind of feeling with coherence, where the integrity of the woman becomes the fabric of her life, and thinking also of the Hindu concept of Maya, which is the substance of life, of the material world. And Daven, you ended up flipping this, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
And why did you do that?
Yes, I'm of two minds about it. So this was one of the the conversations where you felt strongly it should not be that way. It should be its original, that it was not created to be shown.
Yes.
Or emerging from the bottom.
I ultimately deferred to your preference.
Did. And we flip it back the other way again. I mean, I actually love it both ways. And I'm also fascinated by how different the image looks when it is in its different orientations, like the sense
really
of the woman.
it.
Yeah. I had some feedback from a close friend. She said, I don't understand what I'm looking at in looking at this woman. I can't tell. I'm confused by her, which is okay. And I don't, that can be very good also. But when I turned her the other way, I felt a kind of whooshing flow of her emerging down the river. And of course, the other way could be down the river as well. This is all relative.
No, this is very much that she's surrendering and flowing downstream. And this is that she's surging upward and kind of prevailing and declaring, her power. And this is much more assertive.
And so both are true in this card. So as you work with this card, see what feels right in the moment for coherence, or both. Work with both. But I was also really struck by seeing this woman in this configuration. Oh, sideways is nice as well.
Yes, and there were several cards where we kind of wished it could be horizontal.
Yeah, and that was one of the big constraints of this project, was the verticality. So yes, so in the end we went with her emerging from the bottom, and it's really important to me, both because this is a collaboration and just out of respect for artists, that your vision, that you don't feel, I want to use the word violated by how your image is used in its end result. And of course, violated can sound very extreme, but even in the subtle way that the final image feels true to the intention. And so this one was tricky for me, I have to admit. And when you said, okay, I was like, okay, I guess it's okay.
Okay, and thank you for respecting that. I really appreciate that. Must be because you're the daughter of artists.
I am the daughter of artists. I'm recording this from my mother's studio in Tennessee, and I feel yes, I respect the artists.
Well, then I thank you as well as your mom.
Okay.
So moving along, here is grief. And again, this anatomy is completely dedicated to trying to convey a feeling. And if you can picture this just starting as a few squiggly lines of sinking into the depths of grief. It's a watery state of mind, awash with tears, difficult to put into words, difficult to define. I was in grief at the time over the death of my beloved dog. And this also resembles a painting that I did about my dog, which Daven, you almost wanted to use that painting.
I really wanted to use that painting in the
For
deck.
which image you almost wanted to use it as is, but it turned out not to be the final decision. So this is grief, and I felt that these colors, these dark colors, where life can feel so black and gloomy, but there's also this feeling of diving down, 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 and sinking, and then, but the light is still streaming down from above, kind of when you're underwater and you look up and you see the light, and at some point, your own impulse to stay alive brings you back up to the surface.
Mm,
And that's how it goes.
yes.
This is probably my second favorite person from a personal point of view. This is listening. I feel like the light in my room right here is distorting the color a little bit. It's making it look bluer than it is.
Mm.
I don't know why. Maybe because there are a lot of green trees outside. Anyway, with this one, I used transparent fields of color overlapping, which is a technique that I fell in love with probably about 20 years ago now. I've been playing with this technique in all different ways, and I never seem to get tired of it, or I haven't yet. So I love these transparent overlapping fields of color. And here they represent the subtlety of emanations that you hear when you listen, because Daven's not talking about your real ears. She's talking about the inner ear. And we don't mean the inner ear where all the bones are and all of that. We mean the inside ear of your inner self, listening for intuitive emanations. So that's what I tried to create here. There are concentric waves of energy coming out from the figure, and then there are cross streams crossing around that and kind of radiating out from her the way a starburst would. And within it all is her container, her vessel. She's holding something that contains it all.
I love this image, and I love it even more once. So you have incorporated those colors in the side of the box of the deck, and seeing them used like seeing a part of this image used graphically really brought me back to appreciating this image even more. And I've used those parts as when I've created graphics for social media and things like that. And just
I love it.
What you're talking about, those layers of color and the energy that is in the way you've created it and in the layers.
Yeah, I very much tried
beautiful.
to convey the energy of the feeling, the mood of what it's like to pick up these vibrations.
And I also want to say that those kind of soft colors, they could so easily become a kind of cliche, of pastels, and it's so not. And that to me just speaks to your who you are as an artist, your color, you as a colorist, colors you put together and how they speak to each other and interact. And it's, yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk now about my approach to the deck as a whole, which was very important to me and a big part of the challenge. I'm a book illustrator, and when creating a book, you need to think about the whole of the book as well as the individual pages. Too many children's books have the same palette, the same background, the same design, page after page, spread after spread. I don't like that. I've always tried to vary my background colors. I've designed all but one of my books, and I try to vary the design from page to page too, and if not the actual design, then elements within it. So that every time the child turns a page, they're in another world. They're having a different experience. Similarly, this deck is a whole. But you don't turn with a book, you can only see one page at a time. with an oracle deck, you can spread all the cards out in an arc, and people often do when they're drawing a card. And I thought about, what is that arc going to look like? I wanted it to be a rainbow of colors, a rainbow of palettes, really. So the first thing I kept in mind throughout the entire project was, what other card have I done that uses this particular palette? And I tried to vary the palette from card to card so that each one presents not a different color, but a different color relationship. All my life, people have asked me, what's your favorite color? And my answer is, I don't have a favorite color. I have favorite color relationships. So it's the relationships between color, which is kind of like the relationship between a main course and its spices. You know, it's the relationship of all the foods that make up a dish create a unique flavor. So that's how I feel about color relationships, and I tried to vary them throughout the deck. So this is a particular palette with a particular restricted relationship. And I think, Daven, when I first mentioned to you that I was going to use restricted color within most of the cards, you seemed a little bit alarmed that you wanted the deck to be colorful. But I did not want to use a carnival palette or a rainbow palette in card after card after card, because then they would all look alike when you spread them out. And I want each card, again, to bear a different vibration, a different energy. So I'm just going to quickly go through a few examples of completely different palettes.
Yes.
Each one is restricted to several colors, and the effect is quite different. It impacts people in different ways. It actually impacts your eyes and your nervous system a different way to see these different palettes. And it's very satisfying, paradoxically, to work with a restricted palette. For me, this also came from my background in printmaking. I studied at the Art Students League in New York for several years in my late teens and early 20s. And I learned etching and aquatint, a little bit of lithography, and monoprinting. And when you print, color is very restricted. Often you can only use a few colors in a print, and a lot. And you know, working in black and white is also a restricted color palette. Or in working in tonal gradations of one color, like this has tonal gradations basically of two colors in here. And think of how differently this would be.
Yes.
If I changed the background color.
Yeah.
If I changed the color of the trees, if I took out this blue palette, blue and brown, I tried not to use the same palette twice in the deck. I couldn't totally avoid it.
Oh, oh, yes, yes, yes.
And brown again.
Oh, it's lovely to see those two next to each other like that.
Right. And so even seeing them together has some kind of an effect on your perception.
Yes.
So I think about this a lot. And some of them I even started with, well, it's time to do some yellow. I think we need some yellow in the deck. I had to make an effort to include enough yellow.
Green was another one I remember came in a little bit later. Green was another one that came in later, I remember.
Yeah, I had to make an effort to use green as well. Not that I don't like green, but I don't often think in terms of a green palette. This was kind of more like teal. Teal and olive combined. You see that in ocean water. So here's one of the few palettes that's more varied.
Rainbow.
Yeah, more rainbow, more like a prism. And I think it fits the theme. So this is one of the two pieces I want to end with. Is I want to share the two pieces that were the most challenging for me.
Comment on the color really quick before you
sure. Well, I think the prism was appropriate as a symbol.
I mean, what you just said about the arc of the deck and considering the colors in the whole arc. I wanted to comment about that.
Oh, you
really
want to
quickly.
comment? Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
I'd like to.
I
Yes, if
misheard.
I
Go
may.
ahead.
Um,
Sure.
which is, I think I didn't know what you meant by restricted palette. So I'm actually hearing that now and understanding, oh, right, within each image. And it's very beautiful to hear you watch you explain it. You know, it's like this fabulous art lecture, I have to say that this is. And that the sum total of the deck, the color range is, of course, so wide. Like you just said, you tried not to use a color relationship more than once if possible. And so, and so many people have commented about the earthiness of the deck, that there is a sense of unity in across all the cards in terms of the color and the feeling and the mood. And I just wanted to also comment on the color in the back, for the back, or not the backs, the other side, the writing side of the cards.
Yeah.
The borders of the cards and the background, which have different pale colors, and how they create this beautiful palette. I didn't realize how gorgeous the text side of the cards would be in their own right until I got the first printed version.
And all those colors are taken from the art on the other side.
Exactly.
I actually took what's called a medicine dropper color sampler in Photoshop and sampled colors from each art in order to pick the gradients for the other side.
And oh my God, it's just, I mean, those gradients are stunning.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
That was fun. Yeah, that was fun. Okay, so the risk card, I struggled with this one because risk is just a very, very difficult concept to convey, especially in a positive way. You know, when we think of a risk, we think of being reckless. And a storytelling image of recklessness would show something like, you know, a car crash or someone lying in a heap at the bottom of a cliff or something like that, right? And as the mother of, you know, a teenager and two young adults, these kinds of horror scenes are in my mind all too often. I really
on the
don't
surface.
illustrating my worst fears. So,
there's the risk of falling in love, the risk
right.
of speaking up, the risk of sharing a vulnerability, the risk of showing your art, right?
Right, right. So I thought, how do I show a positive risk where somebody knows that they don't know what the outcome is going to be, yet they're feeling a yes inside to
Yes.
go ahead, not recklessly, but with faith,
Yes.
with intuition. This is the feminine way of this deck, is to put yourself out there. And I love, I think it was Ram Dass who said the definition of faith is going to the edge of all that you know and taking one more step.
Oh, I love that.
I was thinking about this and thinking of this woman who is, she's looking at her goal, but she's looking up and she's looking hopeful, and she has her hands crossed over her heart, like, ah, I'm gonna do this. I gotta do this, you know, when you feel a calling. So this kind of risk is a response to your innermost calling. And it took a while for me to figure out what else can I put in there besides this body position and this expression of innocent but not naive hope.
Yes.
And somehow the prism with the eye at the apex just kind of came to me as an explosion of positive energy coming from the center of her intention. And the red and the yellow background, I made it as crude as possible. I really just mashed my brush around in one layer and then put a transparent layer on top of that, which is a gradient. And I just wanted it to be somewhat eruptive, kind of like a volcano erupting, somewhat fiery, somewhat charged and flared, as if you know, a lightning strike or something had taken place. And the white halo, I think, was very important around her. because that to me is pure energy. And I've used white halos a lot in my earlier work, not so much recently, but I was very happy that I remembered to give it a try here. And, the way I created this painting in and of itself was a risk. I just wasn't sure I was going to be able to pull it off. So I thought, well, let me try to put that feeling into this painting, my own uncertainty.
Were there, Yael, did you do any other versions of this image before this final image came? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
So, wow. So out of
I
that
did other
uncertainty,
sketches with other concepts, other pencil sketches.
uh-huh.
I don't think I did any other image. No, this one, ironically, in the end, it tumbled out so easily. And I felt like I was out on a limb the whole time. I also tried to make the features of all these figures different. So there were very few profiles in the deck. I wanted another profile. And there were none that had hair like this, where her hair is loose, but it kind of comes together by itself at the bottom. Almost like, the convergence of rivers coming together or something. Something organic.
Wow.
So that's Risk. And it turned out to be one of my favorites also. And I'm going to end with Love.
Yes.
This was the hardest image for me to illustrate. And I'm not even sure how well I pulled it off. It's love as a pure state of being, not as a dynamic between lovers.
Yes, no object.
No object. That's clearly where your text was pointing. And how do you depict love as a feeling of well-being and interconnectedness within yourself?
A state of being, an eminence.
State of being. It's just a pure, I don't know what. I mean, you can't even, all you can do is point at it with words, and you certainly can't anchor that with an image. So I just tried to put spacious, clear sky in this woman, and a knowing coiling within, something that curls inward, and a spiral can either curl inward or uncurl outward. You can interpret it either way. It can move in either direction. And I also tried to make all of this into sort of a circular root-like structure, like she's rooted in this open, flowing, spiraling. Ay.
Well,
I think this was one of the last paintings, I think. And at this point, I think my mind was just beginning to explode with all this crazy pondering of visual physics all the time. I constantly do while I'm painting. I'm constantly thinking about visual physics and how can I express the energy and the mood and the feeling of this in visual form.
Well, and to me, there's so much fire image in this. And to me, a companion card for this is the Courage of the Heart. That's another, they're sisters to me in the deck, these two, of course. But the fieriness, which is the element of the heart, is here too.
Oh, and you asked me to create a correlation between them.
Oh, there we go. I didn't remember that, but of course they go together because, of course, love.
Yeah, when we were in the sketch stage, see if you can find that card. When we were in the sketch stage, you asked me to put something of one into the other.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I have a story I want to tell about that card, about love. Yeah, look at that. They are so great together. So the story about the love card is just from a couple weeks ago. I had an acupuncture treatment where the acupuncturist put a needle right about here. And this, I mean, I'm sure there's different names for this point, but my friend who used this point on me called it the Great Receiver, and it's a pericardium point. And
Wow.
it's the conception vessel of the extraordinary meridians, which of course has its own story. The extraordinary meridians form a circular, an orbit up the back
Wow.
of the body down the front, and are considered to be the first meridians that come into place in embryologically. When you now I'm going to geek out about this, but when you think about the cell and it divides, there's that first meridian.
Oh,
That's
wow.
that orbit. And
I
so
love it.
anyhow, and they're called extraordinary meridians, including Shungmai, which is the core, the central, the midline, but this one goes around. And so I actually had this point, pericardium point. My friend used it. My friend acupuncturist gave me a session, and then I had another acupuncture session with somebody else, and she did the same point. I mean, when I touch it, it's tender. And the Great Receiver. So the pericardium is the fascial layer that surrounds the heart. And the heart beats within the pericardium, and there's this beautiful relationship between these two. I could talk about that for a while, but the pericardium is also a protector of the heart. It creates a boundary that both encloses and contains the heart and protects it from the outside world. And so to be needled in the Great Receiver place, of course, the danger is that the heart becomes too protected. And not only can it not give, but it can't receive. And I had very dramatic response to this point both times. And the more recent time, I mean, I didn't feel it during the session. It felt like nothing, the second session that I had it. But then the following 3 days, it was very tender, and I was aware of it constantly. And within those 3 days, I pulled the love card and I looked at the image and I saw that spiral, and I said, oh my God, that is the Great Receiver point. That spiral is coming from that place. That energy is emanating from that point. So
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I also love acupuncture, and have had many, many acupuncture treatments in my life. Thank you for sharing that.
yes. And this is how the cards go on to live, and start to build in their potency by living.
Yeah.
Different people who are using them. So, and this is the kind of what would be the word? The channel that you've created with the artwork.
Yeah.
Which we haven't really talked about. You talked about spaciousness, wanting it to be spacious, and yet there's so much specificity and energy and decision in each card, and yet it still has, it's so wide what it can bring through for people using it.
That was the goal. And I don't know if viewers will notice that the clothing I'm wearing is kind of the same palette as these paintings.
Really pleasing. Look at it all.
Cat is out of the bag that I love combining magenta with peach. That's one of my favorite color relationships.
And your pillows too, and your chair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Yael, thank you. This is just so juicy. And
oh, you're so welcome.
This just makes me feel all over again just what a powerful experience this has been for me, and the privilege.
We'll have to collaborate again on another project.
We will. And I know you mentioned you hadn't done a project of this scope, but you've never done an Oracle deck before either, and your work so lends itself to this. So
yeah,
I feel
it has been suggested to me in the past. People have said you should illustrate a tarot deck, and I always thought, well, maybe someday. But this is it's certainly been a wonderful opportunity. So thank you, Daven.
Oh, thank you, Yael. And just to note that when I sent this email, this is my idea, would you be interested in this? You just said yes. We had to work on details, but the first answer was yes. So
it was such a pleasure working with you, and also imagining you all over the United Kingdom the whole time we were working on the deck, just reaching across the ocean and across time zones, and across our different thresholds that we had to cross with the printer and deadlines, and we did it.
We did it. We did it.
Yeah. All
Okay.
right.
Well, there's so much more to share. Maybe we'll do more of these because it's just so rich. And there are many more cards we haven't even looked at. So
sure. Anytime. My pleasure. Thank you, Daven.
Thank you, Yael.